Welcome to Until All of Us Are Free, a year-long education project dedicated to Black liberation as collective liberation. I am your host and the creator of this project, Ijoma Olduwo. So let's talk for a minute about where I've been. For the last couple of months, I have been working on a project that means a lot to me and is a part of this overall project. So my last post was talking about my in-person beloved community meetups. And really that's what I've been working on these last couple of months. Now that we are a few months in, and a lot of people who don't live locally have been asking how they can start their own gatherings, I thought I would make this little episode to really talk about my experience with this, my process, and give some tips for any of you who may want to host such gatherings yourselves. First, let me talk a little bit about the origins of this entire project. So if you watched or listened to the first episode of this podcast, you heard me talk about why I started Until All of Us Are Free. And my goal really was to get people to understand collective liberation. And I wanted to start with my community, Black community, and really from an abolitionist standpoint, talk about how our freedom is connected. And I love this project, I really do, because there is so much that is just theory. You can know words, you can throw them around on the internet, but until you understand how it impacts your life and then what you might be able to do about it, it is just theory. So the education part of this project has meant so much to me, and it's meant a lot for me to be able to make all of this information as accessible as possible. And if you're new to this and you are interested in what I have provided, please go back and check past episodes. There's a lot of great information, a lot of amazing voices talking about liberation work. But I always intended that people would take what they've learned through all of these episodes and apply it in their real life in ways that we can really feel. And it's not just others that I'm hoping will do that. I have always had the goal of doing this myself. So while I do think this education project is a part of me doing really important work, I also wanted to see and feel it in my community. The origin behind these gatherings is really kind of me hitting a low point in my sense of well-being and safety. I don't think it'll be surprising to say that these have been rough months. These have been a rough couple of years. And I think with the amount of work I was trying to do, I think I was trying in some ways to just power through. And that's not sustainable when we are in long-term situations like this. So as everything was heightening up in the world, my feeling of unsafety was rising and rising and rising in ways that kept me kind of on the verge of panic 24/7. It's not a healthy way to live, and you really can't power through that. So I sat with myself and I said, okay, what's core to this? Because actually, not a lot has fundamentally changed. And if you study systemic oppression, if you study global imperialism, you understand that there have been horrific abuses by these systems for a very long time that have been continuing whether we were aware of them or not. So what has changed? For me personally, it was my feeling of safety in my community. This year, we have seen people snatched off the streets, snatched away from their families, and sent to hellish prisons around the world and in the US. We have seen people who have been standing against genocide punished brutally, fired from their jobs, targeted for deportation, targeted for imprisonment. We have seen people who have been protesting copped cities being handed RICO charges that could see them spending the rest of their lives in jail. And as these actions take more and more people away, you expect there to be a collective outrage and collective action. And not seeing that in the scale that we would expect made me feel deeply unsafe. And living in a place like Seattle, where people really do try to mind their own business, As a marginalized person in this city, it made me feel really unsafe here. It made me feel unsafe for myself, for my family, and for many of the people that I love. So I started thinking, what are the barriers to coming together? What are the barriers, at least where I live, to knowing who is at risk in your neighborhood and asking, what can I do to help protect you? And Seattle is known for a thing called the Seattle Freeze. And I have a lot of problems with that term because I think the Seattle Freeze is a very white thing fundamentally. Communities of color here have always survived by knowing each other and sticking together. But the truth is that in recent years, capitalism in this city has dispersed a lot of our communities of color. And so that network that you would have of knowing your neighbors and knowing what they need, that has been forcibly dispersed. So I wanted to create a space where not only people could come together, but they could learn how to be together. There is a lot of fear when it comes to getting together in community, especially around political and social issues. And it's not necessarily because the issues we're trying to tackle are complicated, even though they can be. It's because we are traumatized people doing traumatizing work. And anyone who has been in these spaces understands that it can be fraught, it can be filled with conflict, and it itself can feel really unsafe. And part of that is because we can theorize about how to live in liberated abolitionist ways, but until we learn how to practice that in our day-to-day life and in our relationships with each other, we're going to keep replicating carceral systems that make everyone unsafe. This is a thing I talk about all of the time, right? How we can take these abolitionist principles and apply them to our life. And I wanted to practice that and give other people the opportunity to practice that. And so that's really where these beloved community gatherings were born. So now we are in our third month, and I would say right now we have about 45 to 50 people attending each of our gatherings, and we're going to be starting a book club, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the end. But let me talk a bit about how I set this up for anyone who's curious or thinking of setting up their own. First, I really did have to think, why do I want to do this? Do I want to do this just because I want to hang out with people? Like, what are my goals? What do I want out of this? What do I think it could bring to me? And what do I think it could bring to my community? And it is important to be honest with yourself about what you want out of this, because if you're thinking, I'm going to come out of this with best friends, maybe trying to tackle really difficult topics is not the way to do that. And so I knew from thinking about this long and hard that what I wanted was the sense of safety of knowing that my community was in some way better prepared to protect itself. So that's what I wanted to get out of it. And then I started imagining who would be a part of this and what they might get out of it. Now, this wasn't concrete because people changed the space they're in, and I knew that this was going to change a lot once we got people in. But this is something I really had to think about as I was coming up with what I wanted to be able to offer. Next, I had to think about myself as a real human being and think about what I had to offer to the group, where I envisioned my role in this, and what my limitations might be. So for me, being a neurodivergent person with ADHD and autism, I knew that if I set up something that felt very intimate, at least intimate as far as expectations of me, I was going to be uncomfortable. I know that I struggle with asserting boundaries around that at times, and people can feel really disappointed. I do work that hits a lot of people in their heart, and it makes them feel very close to me. But I have to have a little bit of distance from people who aren't in my close personal circle, and that's part of my own safety. I also know that I get overstimulated in groups of people, especially when a lot of people are trying to talk to me at once. Now, this doesn't mean that I can't host gatherings. I have a long history of leading workshops and things like this, so I knew it could be done. I just had to be clear about what my role was and wasn't. So I knew going into this that I was going to be more of a facilitator, more of kind of a shepherd of this process. But when it came to, coming out and hanging out with people and maybe exchanging phone numbers at the end of the day, I was maybe not going to be that person. And it also meant that I was probably going to need someone to balance that out, to have that kind of emotional energy for people who really need that as we're talking through difficult issues. Next, I had to figure out the practicalities about how many people did I think we would get in these gatherings and how many people would be feasible to host in these gatherings. And so I kind of estimated that anywhere between 30 and like 70 people would be doable for me because, like I said, I do have a history of leading workshops and quite large workshops. So for other people, much smaller may well be better, but this is actually something that I'm used to because I've done this kind of work for years. Next was where. Where did I want to have this? And where could I have this? Venue is about how people can access a place. It's about whether people feel safe in a place. It's also about what's available to you. So for me, I reached out to Langston, which is a beautiful Black arts organization that I have partnered with many times over the years and I love dearly. We ran the Seattle Artist Relief Fund together. I reached out to Langston to ask if they could partner because I knew that would be a space that could host everyone. I knew it was accessible. I knew it felt really safe to a lot of community members. And I knew that it could be within my budget because of how generous they are. Then I had to think about how I was going to get the word out. And so it was here on this Substack, and it was also on social media. And that was how initially I was going to get the word out. And I would say if I would do that again, I might have scaled it back a little bit because I think I have a lot of followers on social media. I have close to 500,000 followers on social media. And there were a lot of people who RSVP'd because they were excited about it without really thinking about, do I even live locally? Would I actually be able to attend? And so for me, I think it would have been better for me to have people to sign up for more information about it because some people just wanted to be informed about what we were doing and then later send sign-ups to that smaller group for people who actually want to attend. Because we had so many RSVPs for our first gathering that we had to shut it off and a lot of people couldn't RSVP. But the amount of people who actually ended up showing up was much smaller because a lot of people who signed up right away weren't even in the state. And then I really did have to consider accessibility. Accessibility is super important to me and I really think should be important to anyone doing liberation work. If we aren't free until all of us are free, then this work that we do has to be something that everyone or as many people as possible can access. Now, I know that not everyone can attend in-person gatherings, and so that's why I'm so glad to have these online resources available to people as well, and to be adding the book club component to that because that is virtual. But for me, accessibility meant having things on a ground floor and making masks required. And I know that it is not sexy to talk about masking in 2025, but COVID is real. And our populations that are vulnerable to what's happening in the world are also more vulnerable to COVID. And I didn't want people to miss out, people who really would love to be in community because they didn't feel safe, because they didn't want to make that bargain with their health. We have gatherings and then we have brunch. The gathering is mask required, and we have extra masks for people who forget them. And so throughout the gathering portion, people are masked. And then people can unmask once they get their food for brunch. But we ask that they wait till after they've gotten their food so that people can get through the line and get their food and not worry about being right up against people who are unmasked. And we also have to-go containers for people who don't feel comfortable kind of staying in this space as people unmask. And so that's kind of the way I've tried to accommodate as many people's needs as possible while still making this something that really feels collective and enjoyable. And you know what? No one's complained about the masks. We have had to make sure we are mic'd because it is harder to hear people masks. So we did have one gathering where it didn't have microphones and the difference was felt. And so people who had difficulty hearing we're having even more trouble in the event. But usually we have microphones. And so that is something that we've done because of the size of our group. If you're meeting in like a living room, that may not be an issue. And then we have the think safety. So we already thought about this in our location. But for me, I thought, okay, what are some initial agreements that I can ask people to really agree to before entering this space so that we all kind of know that we're on a similar page to start with. I knew, of course, this agreement would be modified once we all got together, but I really wanted to say, hey, if you're entering this, you're entering an abolitionist space and you're coming knowing that you're going to do your best to live up to abolitionist principles, and also talking about issues of consent around photographs or quoting people or revealing people's personal information, and also talking about conflict resolution. You know, what happens when we're in a heated discussion? What happens if someone says something offensive on accident? What is the process we're going to adhere to or try to adhere to? And so I wrote out kind of a list of things for an agreement and asked people to agree to that before entering the space. And then we talked about that during our first gathering. So for our first gathering, I had kind of a rough run of show icebreakers, how we were going to introduce ourselves to each other. But really, most of that first gathering was us dreaming together, talking a little bit about what abolitionism is, and talking a bit about why we came into this space, what we were hoping we could get, and what it might look like to apply these principles in community together. And then we also talked about what was preventing us from feeling safe or comfortable or able to build more robust activist and movement spaces in our communities. And so we talked about that, and we had a lot of dreams, and we wrote a lot down, and it really helped me shape what our initial gatherings might be focused on. And so each gathering does have a theme. That's what I've decided. You don't have to decide that when you have your own gatherings. But for me, it's my way of making sure that we're covering important things, because I don't actually want my gatherings that I'm hosting to be the community that's being built. And I know that sounds weird, but what I want is people to come from all over our local area and learn how to build community. And some people are connecting. I see people exchanging contact information at every gathering. But what I really want is people to feel more empowered and confident that they can then go into their communities and make those communities stronger and build coalition there. And so what I'm really trying to do is plant seeds for how we build community. I think that pulling people together because they're all interested in abolition is important, but that's not enough of a foundation often to build like a community that does everything together and, you know, does all this work together. But we are in different communities. We are in disabled community, BIPOC community, church community, and all of those could be more activated towards justice and liberation when we have the skill set to bring it in. And so for me, these gatherings are really about making those connections and building those strengths so that when you go out into your world, into your spaces, you can make those spaces safer for everyone involved, and we can all be working in our spaces where we can do our best work. So we had our first gathering, we got a lot of great feedback, and then we continued on. And it has been really amazing to watch people become more and more comfortable, to see the engagement increase with every gathering, and to see people really become invested in how these gatherings work. One testament, I think, to how these have been going is I got an email from an attendee who has attended every gathering and saying just a list of things that they love about the gatherings and how we embody abolitionist principles, my partner and I, as we host these gatherings. And it was so lovely to see them kind of pinpoint the different ways in which we are being very intentional in how we steward these gatherings. And then they said, in that spirit, here are some suggestions. And they had lovely suggestions for how to better utilize our brunch time. And it was so wonderful to see that like people felt comfortable enough to send this email. And I've had other emails like that from people just asking or volunteering and saying, I would love to host one of these gatherings. I would love to talk about this particular topic. Let me connect you with someone who's an expert in this space. So it has been wonderful. We're going to be having another gathering this weekend, and we're actually going to be talking about how we keep each other safe. And so we're bringing in frontline community workers who have been working really hard to protect some of our more targeted communities, to discuss the work they're doing, how we can support it, how we can join, and how we can do similar work in our own communities. So for me, the hardest part of these gatherings has been the food. Honestly, I wanted to have a brunch component. I think food is actually really important for many communities of color and how we get together and gather. And I have really severe ADHD, and so is my partner. And between the two of us, it has always been kind of a scramble to make sure that we have the food together on time. Also, it's the most expensive part of this. Now, you don't have to provide food in these gatherings. Your gatherings can be small, they can be intimate, they could be large. You could do potlucks, you could do no food at all. But this is what I wanted for it. And so getting the funding for the food and getting it ordered in time and accommodating people's dietary needs has been probably the biggest challenge. And I'm glad, because honestly, if you're going to have a challenge, I'm blessed that that's the biggest challenge that we've had so far. And so now we are expanding into a book club. And this book club is online. So we'll be meeting up. We have like a Discord where people can chat about the book that we're reading for the month. And then we have a monthly online meeting where we will discuss the book together. And I am very excited to start this. I've wanted to start a book club for a really long time. Often books that I love and I want people to read, I am reading for research for my own projects. And you read quite differently for research. You're not really taking in the full experience of it because of the bulk of reading that you have to do and the pointed nature of research. And so I'm so excited to go through some of these texts that I have looked through in the past, but maybe haven't gotten to savor, and to be introduced to new texts that many members have already sent in as suggestions for future books. So if you don't live locally or you can't attend our specific gatherings, but you're interested in the book club, I will be including a link to sign up in the show notes for that. I am not sure how many people I will include in the book club, like what's feasible or not, but I think it'll probably be a fairly large number just because when you're building virtual spaces, it's actually a lot easier to accommodate more people. And so for our first month, we will be reading Conflict is Not Abuse, and I'm really excited to dive into that book again. I hope that this has been informative and maybe inspiring to you if you're looking at your own community and what you might be able to build there. If you are feeling like it is really hard to know where your community is, to know where like-minded people are, you're not alone. There are so many other people feeling that way. One thing I've learned over my years of doing work like this is that when I put a call out, I get a response. And I get a response because there's just no human experience so unique that no one else has felt it. Even if you live in a more conservative space, there are other people perhaps feeling very outnumbered and alone and unsafe, just like you. So building spaces like this and offering up spaces like this is really, really important. You don't have to be well known. You don't have to be a community organizer, and you don't have to bring 50 people together. You could bring 4 people together. You could bring 10 people together. You could sit in your living room. You could sit at the park. You could do this all online. Just learning how to be in community with real care and real purpose, with an eye towards protecting each other and really taking action when necessary. This is important work we have to do. You can't protect your neighbors if you don't know your neighbors. You can't stand for community if you don't feel like you're a part of community. And community building skills are being intentionally eroded by capitalist government. Don't feel ashamed if you don't feel plugged in. Don't feel ashamed if you feel disconnected. Don't feel ashamed if you feel nervous about reaching out to people or you feel rusty in how to be in community. Not only are we being actively discouraged from doing so, but we're also still in a pandemic that for many years has made it difficult to be around each other. And so with all of that, it's going to be rusty. There's going to be bumps on the road, but I can tell you, I feel more connected to community in this work that I have been doing, not only with these beloved community gatherings, but with all of the other movement work I've been doing in person over these last couple of years. I feel more connected, even in hardship, even while others have tried to punish me for my work. I feel more connected and safe and grounded than I have in a long time, because I do know who my community is, and I can really see the foundation that we have built and how it will last. I want that for you. I want that for anyone who is abolition-minded. I want you to know that you're not alone, and in fact that you can't be alone, that we do this together. I want you to feel connected. I want you to feel held. I want you to have some place of safety in this very scary world. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Until All of Us Are Free, a year-long education project dedicated to Black liberation as collective liberation. I am your host and the creator of this project, Ijoma Odawa. Please be sure to check out the show notes here. I have some basic questions to ask yourself if you want to build your own community gatherings. And so please check that out. And like I said, if you want to join our book club, there will be a link for that as well. And while you're checking out the show notes, you can also become a paid subscriber of this project. This project is currently self-funded and community-funded through subscriptions. And so anything that you could put towards this project helps us make the best quality content possible while keeping it as accessible as possible. I thank you for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you in future episodes, and I hope that you can take care of each other.